podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Simone Sweeney. I'm an executive and leadership coach following a 25-year career leading high-performing teams in companies like Apple and the Lego Group. In this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, and thought leaders as we make the case for why the future of great leadership is human. Discover how coaches are working to bring about a seismic change in how we define an incredible leader. We'll also consider the role of people versus technology and discuss why it's more important than ever to harness skills like self-awareness, communication, and gratitude, amongst others. In this series, our aim is to explore the very human capabilities and behaviors that will inspire a revolution in leadership and change the face of business. Today, I'm speaking to Julie Flower, a leadership and team development coach and facilitator. Julie is also passionate about improv and uses creative techniques in her coaching, and I'm sure that will get us thinking in different ways. Julie, thanks so much for joining me as we talk about leadership.
Oh, hi, Simone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Yes, of course. So I think varied is probably the word. I've been a coach for just over a decade, and I work with leaders and developing leaders in a whole range of situations, but I've got a particular focus on the public services, government, and the third sector, because my professional background is predominantly within the public services, within health. And I do a lot of work really around the uncertainty of leadership, but also the opportunity of it, navigating complex systems and environments in a constant state of flux and change. And so I sometimes integrate improvisation into the work that I do. I also perform improvisation and teach it in both the coaching context, but also in a wider leadership and team context. And yeah, so it's varied and I hope very human.
Fantastic. And as we are exploring throughout this series, we're looking at leadership and the human aspects of it. So bringing that improvisation and creativity into coaching, I'm sure will inspire those listening to think about coaching leaders in a slightly different way. So I'd love to start by asking what leadership means to you.
For me, I think it's about creating the conditions for everyone to work effectively towards a common goal. And when I talk about everyone, I think for modern leaders, that's not just people in a hierarchy, if you like, their traditional team or organization, but increasingly it could be partner organizations, it could be other stakeholders, other communities. So really thinking about how we can mobilize people towards a common goal and create the conditions for them to succeed and excel. I think that's what leadership is all about.
Fantastic. I love how you use the term mobilize people and looking at that kind of collective direction and the inspiration of a group towards meeting a goal or solving a problem together. And you were going to focus quite a bit on collaboration and influencing today. But one of the things that many of the leaders I work with, and indeed when I was leader myself, I was constantly facing ambiguity and change. What types of change are you commonly coaching leaders and their teams around?
Again, quite varied. I think often the leaders who I'm working with are experiencing, I don't want to call it a perfect storm, but a whole range of external and internal factors. And so sometimes it's change as in, reorganization type change, those sorts of things. But often the organizations that I'm working with are facing quite significant societal factors. And particularly at the moment when, for instance, if people are working in a social space, there might be greater complexity of need. There are fewer providers potentially, or people are finding it more difficult to access some services. And with some of the challenges that we've had with respect to the economy, certainly within the third sector, as well as the public services, it feels like budgets are very constrained. So I think there's much greater need, and also people are navigating the fact that it's quite hard to plan ahead. So for the change piece, my real I suppose, insight, if you like, in working with leaders is that they need to become more comfortable with uncertainty. And actually, the change that they're working with is not necessarily that they know exactly what their next 10 steps are going to be. They just need to know what their next one step is going to be, and then how they're going to learn from that and how they're going to use that and adapt and take into account different changing circumstances. So it's not that it's just gradual, iterative change, but I think it's got a different quality perhaps to, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when it was all about, yeah, we've got this really clear transformation goal and this is what we're going to do. Because invariably, whatever you think 5 years might look like ahead, or even 3 years, probably that's not going to be the case. So how can we be adaptable and really make the most of the situation at any given time?
It's such an important reflection about the depth of complexity that leaders are facing right now. Certainly with the leadership teams I work with and leaders themselves, and within the context I worked in as a leader of high-performing teams, the level of complexity now is greater than I think any we've ever seen. And it does have those elements of the kind of practical business change, things like reorganizations, the introduction of new technologies, working on a global scale relating to the pandemic, all within recent memory, but also a greater focus on what we would maybe see as the more human side of leadership. People are closer and more connected. So the community and the kind of the social layers to that change also exists. So what does it mean to kind of lead people today? Has it changed from 10 or 15 years ago?
I think our understanding of it has, and I think the way in which we approach it has. I think almost 10 or 15 years ago, we could perhaps get away with believing that it was more about the systems and processes and the tasks and the kind of broad KPIs. Whereas I think there's much greater understanding perhaps of human psychology and how it relates to work. But I would also agree that given some of the shocks that have happened within our systems and perhaps people's different sense of what work and life are about, people's own priorities, that the human side is now much more important to people. And certainly working a lot within the third sector and the public sectors, I find that it's hugely grounding to help teams and leaders reflect on what drives them, their motivation, their purpose, really connecting them with the meaning of their leadership and what it means to make meaningful connections and relationships with others. Because ultimately, those are the things that are going to drive sustainable change. Those are the things that are going to take them over rough patches. And if I think back to some of the teams that I work with, they've had to deal with really extraordinary challenges over the last few years. And it's the human connection and the human understanding that has helped them get through that.
I love how you speak to that kind of human connection and the kind of the depth of impact that private life now has with work life, which is kind of a deeper integration than, maybe a leader of the past had experienced. And you spoke about how you focus on purpose and meaning in work. How can coaches support the leaders they're working with in exploring some of those spaces which maybe hadn't entered into the coaching space as recently as even 5 years ago?
Yeah, certainly I find in working with leaders that it can be quite confronting initially to ask those open questions around what's really important to them about what they're working on. What really drove them to get involved in this? Ultimately, what's most important and meaningful to them about this? It can feel quite confronting and exposing, partly because maybe they find that perhaps they're not as connected with it as they thought they were. But actually, it can also just be hugely powerful for them. So I think as a coach who is prepared to just hold a space for leaders and support leaders in really connecting with what's important and be prepared that that might lead to the expression of some quite strong emotions, quite strong discomfort. I still find, and obviously as a coach, that can be quite uncomfortable at times. But actually, I just find it can be hugely powerful, both on the one-to-one, but also in a team or a group environment. And I'm just thinking back to one scenario where I was coaching a senior team within the charity sector. And there was a moment where, suddenly just things shift in the room where everybody gives personal stories, connects with that meaning and purpose. And actually, it led to a huge outpouring of emotion. But it was a critical moment to then really gel everybody and build that motivation for the next phase in what was actually quite a complex and challenging environment for them.
So, Julie, I love how you speak about holding space for leaders and their teams, which invites some of those deeper explorations behind maybe the more emotional side of the work they do or the relationships they have within that work and that team environment. And that might be a newer space or way of working for many coaches or HR professionals. Is there anything that people working in those spaces, and particularly coaches, can do to build their level of comfort or their skills in working in those more emotionally charged spaces?
Oh, I'm smiling. Obviously, our listeners can't see that, but might sense it. Only because when I was first training as a coach, I had immense discomfort. And I remember reflecting for a long time, and I still do, on my level of comfort when those strong emotions are expressed in all sorts of different ways. I think I have found that my training in improvisation has helped me with that. And some of the simple exercises and aspects of improv that I move across into the coaching space, including in coach training, can help with that, I suppose, level of comfort around strong emotions and being willing to hold that space and that human connection. I mean, even a very simple mirroring technique, if we were to sit here opposite each other, even on camera, and just sort of mirror each other's movements, and possibly then we'd start to mirror emotional states and notice all sorts of things. That level of intensity can be hugely exposing, but actually can be a great sort of training in just being there as a coach and becoming more comfortable in that sort of environment. Perhaps where we're not just relying on the noise of asking more questions or those sorts of, yes, let's move the agenda forward. Actually, let's just be and see what bubbles up.
That's a really important reminder, for a coach to also kind of dance in the moment and to leave the space for fluidity and flexibility, because you don't know what's going to come up. And certainly when I was leading teams, you would, and with the teams I'm working with in a coaching capacity now, you can always expect the unexpected. And often we don't plan for that. Coaches can be more regimental in a way with some of the techniques and the tools that we use. So that's a wonderful reminder for us to kind of keep that space open and to respond in as human a way as possible, and to dust off some of those activities and more creative approaches that we maybe haven't tried since coach training or are new and seeing some success. So it's wonderful that you're able to share that with us today. Holding that kind of fluidity and flexibility is also really important, because we know that change can be a very uncomfortable place for someone to be, or for, a team or a group of leaders. And typically, a leader will acutely feel the pressure of that change for themselves and what that means in terms of their transition and the ambiguity and complexity maybe they're working through, but also any feelings they may have in relation to it. And of course, that of their teams. And one of the common things that I see with my clients, and I experienced myself working with, large global teams where you had different cultural nuances and different levels of people working in the team, is that there's often a level of reassurance and emotional support that the team is looking to the leader for. And as that leader leads their team through change or through complexity and ambiguity, that continues to intensify. And many of the clients I'm seeing just need some help with the more human side of what the kind of cascade from the change will be. How important is it for a coach to support a leader on that side of things? Or indeed, is it important for a coach to work in those spaces?
I think it's hugely important. Often the coaching space and the coaching relationship will be perhaps the only space where a leader, I think, can genuinely sort of lower their shoulders and be really honest about how, say, a particular change is affecting them and their team, and perhaps express some of the weight of this pressure, if you like. I think back to the theme of ambiguity and uncertainty. Sometimes I think as leaders, we put pressure on ourselves by feeling we have to know all the answers and have to control as much as possible and give certainty to others. In the same way that perhaps sometimes as coaches, we put too much pressure on ourselves to feel that, the coaching session or relationship must be beautifully formed and very clear, and all the questions will be so delightfully selected. There's almost an element of control that puts an emotional pressure. Whereas I think if we think back to that idea of creating conditions, then as coaches, we can create a space where leaders can reflect, discover, explore, express, but also hopefully then they can create similar environments for their members of staff. So of course, they're still supportive and cognizant of the human elements of change, but actually they're helping to increase their members of staff's resilience. They're helping to empower people to be able to navigate this for themselves, that we're not having to do everything for everybody, and nor should we. So I think it's a fundamental sort of philosophical shift, which I think is a fundamental part of coaching, but also should be a fundamental part of leadership.
Absolutely. And I love how there is that kind of degree of safety in those conversations where there is the room for exploration in terms of what those kind of pressures or the demands of that change or the team are coming in. And I think back to some of my experiences as a leader, some of the most surprising progressive and supportive conversations I had were in groups of cross-functional leaders where the leaders had in common that they were spearheading a function, and often they would be diverse. You'd have finance and marketing and sales, operations, legal, sitting around a table. So everyone would have potentially a different level of challenge or a different context for their challenge. But that common stream was that they were supporting a change journey with a group. And it was quite a non-judgmental space. And, I was very fortunate to work in businesses that had a very full culture that prided themselves on that kind of openness and collaboration. And that support between the leaders and that sharing of ideas and best practices, as well as being a shoulder to lean on and a kind of very practical, support and mechanism, was one of the kind of the best outcomes I'd have in those cross-functional situations. But in those partnerships, you often would need to make decisions collectively that would influence the wider teams or the direction of the business. And those relationships where you had that mutual support were very much influenced by the strength of the kind of working partnerships, which of course leads to collaboration. And when you are making decisions collectively, or you're working in a very fast-paced environment, or, indeed anywhere a group of people are coming together to drive an outcome, collaboration is one of those unsung skills of great leaders and is vital in a change situation. So what does collaboration mean? And is there a role for coaches in fostering greater collaboration?
Again, I'm smiling because I think collaboration is one of those things that can sometimes be seen as a bit fluffy. Maybe if it's a bit hard to define. But actually, I think it's absolutely crucial. And the quality of it, you kind of know when it's missing, right? So for me, collaboration is the idea of working together towards a shared goal. And often that might be working creatively, as you say, with people with diverse experiences and backgrounds to address a common challenge or solve a problem or generate ideas. So I see it as a very active process that is ultimately relational, but has a very clear shared purpose. And I think sometimes some of the woolliness and bad reputation might be when people say, oh, we need to collaborate, but they're not very clear about actually what they're working towards and how they're going to do it. So, how can we make it a much more active, purposeful process?
I love how you speak to shared purpose, and you spoke to the importance of having purpose in individuals, and particularly when they were relating to change or struggling with ambiguity or uncertainty. And in a team dynamic, there's a lot of tensions on purpose, because if you look to a kind of a cross-functional working group, or even a diverse team who comes from different cultures and different backgrounds, there will be tensions where what one individual or one function needs and wants against what another. How can a coach help to, and should a coach work to bring some clarity towards a shared purpose in order to support the leaders as they collaborate towards achieving that shared purpose?
I think a coach can certainly have a role within that, because I suppose a coach is in a very privileged position in perhaps being able to stand back a little bit, hold a mirror up, identify perhaps where there are some of those tensions or things that don't quite resonate together. Can help, I suppose, hold that space again for people to work through it. And I'm thinking of examples. I've got a particular example in my mind of doing some work with cross-functional work with different teams within a clinical research environment. And actually, again, just as a coach, holding that space in order for people to really be clear about what their particular motivations and purpose are, but also then helping them to tease out what is a common thread and what can we live with? What's the accommodation we might need to make in order to work with these people towards this particular thing? I always think that particularly with a kind of team of teams environment in a system, it's what is it that uniquely we can all only do together? And is it worth the effort? Because let's face it, collaboration can be a lot of effort. And sometimes it might feel that we don't get the reward. So I think it's just really helping people to get together and understand what, at a personal level, at a team level, but also at a systems level, they hope the outcome will be, and how we can find a way of working through that and working together effectively and efficiently, fundamentally, because again, it can just become this whole time-consuming thing, which many people might have had a bad experience of in the past.
Absolutely. And that navigation of the team dynamic and the different influences to get to the shared purpose is vital when working, I think, in any team, whether they are, a cross-functional team or are all pulling in the same direction, because they have a documented, resident, relevant collective purpose. And maybe in those spaces where we are wrangling with shared purpose, we need to go further than just collaboration and, tip into influencing in terms of trying to ensure that outcomes are reached, decisions are made, that a particular course of action or decision is reached. How is influencing different from collaboration?
I don't have the dictionary in front of me, but I suppose influencing perhaps suggests a stronger intent and perhaps an idea of what the outcome should be. I feel a bit cautious because I think there are obviously many different ways or many different reasons why you might want to influence someone. And it might be more about perhaps their behaviors rather than what they actually need to think or the decision that they need to make. I often teach on leadership programs for developing leaders, and it's really interesting because sometimes the word influence acts as quite as an allergen for them. And we often spend quite a bit of time thinking about what influence means and how that may or may not be different to persuasion and what some of the ethics are of it. So I think fundamentally, how we as leaders, and I suppose I would count myself in that camp in certain roles that I play, how we as leaders think about influencing ultimately needs us to reflect on our genuine motivations and a number of ethical factors. For what reason are we seeking to somehow change the behavior or the thoughts or the decisions of others? And how can we justify that? But I do think there's something around the fact that collaboration can stymie decision making. So there might be a point where we need to consider as leaders, when we have done enough collaborative working in terms of perhaps working through to get a particular solution, and when we might need to perhaps use some of our wider influencing skills in order to ensure that we can move forward. And of course, they can be quite nuanced. They can bring in our understanding of behavioral economics, psychology, all of those sorts of things. Just accepting that we know how the world works and how humans work, but that we are hopefully using them towards a common good rather than for any nefarious purpose.
That is a really thought-provoking response there that you've just given to me on influencing and collaboration. And I come from organizations, most recently working in leadership capacity before I turned to coaching full-time at the Lego Group. And before that, I was at Apple, before that, HP, big American tech corporations, where collaboration is absolutely critical. But influencing is a named skill. That's something that you are recruited for, the ability to kind of connect. And I think the kind of key there, because I can absolutely see how if you look at influencing in its kind of classic definition sense, you are trying to take someone, encourage an action that they maybe had not naturally arrived at, how that could have a negative connotation. So the need for shared purpose and an alignment in your mission, your values, your purpose, and the ways that you work in, what is ethical and moral and right for that context, the community you work in, the clients you support, the products you deliver, in order to reach decisions. So collaboration then maybe tipping into influencing, but in a safe and kind of controlled way, if you will, so that it isn't endless circular conversations. Because from the smallest to the biggest businesses that I've worked in, both I was a worker, as a leader, but also the coaching work I've done with teams, you will see that from the smallest, most agile startup to the biggest organizations, that sometimes groups can spin when there are too many competing directives and objectives. So that shared purpose then becomes really important. And collaboration is necessary to kind of take us towards achieving the common purpose and the overall objectives. But sometimes influencing maybe is the nudge that takes you past that endless circle.
I would agree. And it makes me think about sort of systems change within health and social care. So I often work with leaders who are trying to lead some kind of change which involves multiple organizations and different stakeholders. So it could be, a couple of health organizations, social care, it could be a non-profit in an area. And fundamentally, all of these organizations have got plenty of things that they need to be doing themselves, right, in order to fulfill their purpose as organizations. But they've identified some kind of common goal. And fundamentally, that's a really tough leadership challenge, which requires that, as we said, shared purpose and values around this thing. But actually the leader as such may not have those hierarchical influencing levers to pull. And it's much more about how they can role model, gain a shared purpose, and actually build those collaborative relationships. So I think as a coach, I've often worked with leaders to essentially coach those relationships between different professionals or different organizations in order to facilitate some of that collaboration and influence those players in order to actually say, well, this is worth doing because there are so many other things that we could be spending our time on. And to have a level of ambition across a system is, it can feel quite a risky and exposing thing to do.
I think it's really important context for us that not all businesses and organizations are driven by profit or by a particular kind of commercial objective. And, within the work that you've done over many years within the kind of not-for-profit and the kind of the more socially conscious, purpose-led organizational space, do you see other challenges that the leaders within those types of organizations face that might be distinct or different from a more kind of corporate leadership role?
I think so. I mean, certainly within the space that I've often inhabited, there's a stronger impact, if you like, from policy, from government, from that side of things. Sometimes a stronger regulatory environment, obviously for certain services, although that will impact on certain commercial organisations as well. I think the balance of cooperation and collaboration versus competition is quite an interesting one because, of course, we're used to thinking of the private sector as being a competitive environment, but actually thinking about the charity and third sector, in many ways, it is very competitive. So you might have several organizations that have a similar purpose. So a similar group of individuals or beneficiaries who they would like to improve the lives of in some way. But they might feel very competitive. They could feel like they're in competition for government, like commissioned contracts. They might feel in competition for ever more dwindling resources and donations and things like that. And so I find that fascinating, but also quite worrying because sometimes I think it leads to individual charities acting as silos and working as islands when actually there are genuine opportunities for them to collaborate, particularly around, say, lobbying, government, and potentially in bringing together their services to offer a more rounded, holistic service for beneficiaries. So I do think, you wouldn't necessarily think that competition is a challenge in the charity sector, but it absolutely is. It manifests itself in different ways. And I think that can be quite difficult for people in that environment to bear because they're perhaps very purpose and values led, but yet suddenly they're having to be quite commercial.
That's a great reflection and one I certainly see. I'm working with a number of charities at the moment as well. And certainly in the not-for-profit sector, you maybe are seeing a greater need for some of these wider collaborative and influencing skills, but that's often coupled with a more narrow and insular view. And as you're, speaking to so eloquently, that's a space that perhaps you would get a more significant impact from with a different way of working. Is there a role that coaching can play in opening new ways of thinking and channeling that incredible energy that we see in the not-for-profit space towards looking at a new model or new approach?
Yes, I think coaching can absolutely have a role. I think one of the wonders of coaching, and I think I genuinely believe that, is supporting people and encouraging them to find different perspectives within a system and see things from others' point of view, and also to really think about the possible. So helping people I often use quite a lot of embodiment and visualization in the work that I do. And I think really coaches can help people to imagine possibility and to really inhabit that space. And I suppose think beyond the confines perhaps of their own organizations or what they imagined was possible. So I think that's one role. And I'm just thinking back to some group coaching that I did with quite new chief execs in the nonprofit sector. And again, I thought that was a really good example of how coaching can fire up that sense of the possible and the benefits of collaboration and different ways of thinking. So these were, I was working with a group of 6 recently appointed CEOs in totally different sorts of charities. So perhaps ones that may not actually collaborate with each other on work. But the beauty of a group coaching scenario is, as you've mentioned, some of that kind of cross-functional kind of peer support, if you like, but that space where people can express things and learn from each other. And I think that I saw some sparks of that sense of, there are different ways in which we can work, really opening up for people. Because it can be quite lonely, let's face it, as a leader, and particularly perhaps in a small or medium-sized organization.
Yeah. And I love how you're looking at coaching and mechanisms like a group coaching scenario where you have different experiences and different voices within the room. If we think back to kind of collaboration and influencing to a degree, those are soft skills that maybe many of us have kind of not grown up and maybe recognized as core leadership competencies. Indeed, many of the competencies that make a effective kind of human-centered leader do rely on soft skills. And those demand greater self-awareness and emotional intelligence, as well as kind of conditions that provide psychological safety. And working in those more soft skill spaces and focusing your development there can be quite uncomfortable or draining for many managers, whether they're fairly new as a leader or they've been doing it for decades. Is there any work that a coach can do to support their clients who are looking to develop some of these softer leadership competencies?
Yeah, so 2 kind of core things spring to mind. One is just holding that space for clients so they can genuinely reflect and express almost that kind of cathartic sense of coaching, particularly if they feel, as you say, that they are quite drained from some of the more human side of what they're doing, and the collaboration and the influencing as leaders or managers. But the other thing is, as coaches, we can support clients to develop, experiment with, step into some of those skill spaces, I think. And that makes me think of some of the read across from my improvisation work and how I sometimes use very simple exercises from improvisation to help leaders and teams kind of safely, because we're often using nonsensical subjects and made up things, but safely experiment with what it feels like to collaborate and what it might feel like to experience the emotional range associated with collaboration, whether it's, intense joy or fear and apprehension or surprise. So, even like simple kind of storytelling activities where we might essentially yes and each other. So building rather than blocking on others' suggestions and doing some very simple exercises to help people really viscerally experience things, I think can perhaps then take a bit of the heat out of it when they go and do these things in real life, if you like.
That's wonderful. So holding that space is very important, but also not being afraid as a coach to draw on creative tools and activities. And your improv background is really inspiring there within this type of work where people may be feeling a level of discomfort. You're creating the space for them to explore and to try different approaches and experiences without the kind of professional stake being high, because they're in that environment of the safe coaching container, which is really, really exciting. Are there any kind of go-to improv or creative techniques that you use that you've seen as very effective for inspiring greater collaboration in leaders?
Oh, I could read you a whole list, but
Amazing.
I know we can't do that. Certainly some of these things that build on the principle of yes and. So we might develop maybe in pairs or in a small group. Imagine that we're having a day trip together and we'll all add an extra thing to this day trip, but it will involve real listening actively and then collaboration, building rather than blocking. Or maybe we'll tell a story together where we add one word or one sentence at a time. Or maybe we'll do sort of something more physical and embodied, which you can even do online, maybe sort of building little tableau where we each add something to the tableau. And what's wonderful with those sorts of things is you might start maybe with, 2 or 3 people doing it, but then perhaps by the end of the session, you have a beautiful tableau where 10 or 15 people have essentially built, I don't know, a kind of nonsensical machine or a sort of picture, if you like, a physical picture of something where they've each added an element and then the whole has become greater than the parts. And you can almost kind of feel it in the air when that sort of thing happens. It's a real shift.
I love how you are using the kind of additive process, the team working together and creating something, whether it's a group that don't know each other coming together in the coaching space, or it's a team already working. And we will cover in another one of the series episodes the importance of communication and storytelling. So that kind of collaborative approach is also a beautiful way to bring in another core leadership competency, which is leadership. So I will definitely be looking back to this episode and your encouragement of the more creative coaching techniques to build that. And while we're, picking your marvelous creative brain, is there a powerful question that you like to use when you're coaching leaders to support their development work or get them thinking differently?
That's a great question because, I also teach coaching. I teach on the professional certificate at Henley Business School, and I'm very much a lover of a powerful question, but I don't like a list of powerful questions. I suppose being someone who likes to be in the moment, I like to see just what bubbles up. And I sometimes think the most powerful questions can be those that are super simple. They may just even be a word played back with a different inflection, or building on a metaphor and language that people have used. So I suppose I do like to apply that being in the moment and building on whatever's been said. But I suppose if you're going to push me on it, something that I find is a very helpful question is just, what assumptions are you making? Obviously, it builds on the cognitive behavioral approach. It builds to some extent on Nancy Klein, but just asking that question, what assumptions are you making, can lead to such fascinating insights and such thought-provoking conversations that I think that can often be a great way in.
I think that is a fantastic question and is particularly relevant and poignant for leaders who often don't take the time or feel that they don't have the opportunity to just stop, reflect, and work through things. So whether you're in the private or the public sector, that demand on time and maybe those feelings of overwhelm sometimes defeats the just sitting back and looking at things with a different lens. So suggesting what assumptions you're making as a powerful question, is really, I think, relevant and a great one for our audience to kind of reflect on. I certainly know I'll work that into my coaching practice more. Is there an inspirational leader that you've worked with, either that you've been led by or that you've coached, that you admire? And if so, what are the admirable qualities that made them such an effective leader?
So I was actually reflecting on this idea just a couple of days ago because I noticed on LinkedIn that my first leader who I experienced in the NHS, was retiring. And so it made me think about her leadership and what it is that had inspired me about her. And I think it's some of the things that we have spoken about. So that very clear sense of overriding purpose and values as a leader. And certainly she is someone who can work across a number of different organisations, professionals and perspectives. So I would say that she was my first experience of a genuine systems leader who was relying not on hierarchical position or on reward levers around things like bonuses and money. That wasn't the environment we were working in. But she really was able to influence through her building of relationships, through getting people towards a common purpose, and actually through giving people space to experiment, learn, thrive. So I thought she had a really good balance, really, and I suppose a coaching style of leadership, if you like, the right balance of support and challenge. So yeah, it's funny because I was just reflecting on her, as I say, a couple of days ago. And I think that's really influenced me as I've moved through both my own leadership career, but also into then my coaching work. And I've certainly come across some very inspirational leaders as I've been coaching and working with leaders over the past decade or so.
It's always a nice reflection to look back on the leaders you've encountered, either that you've experienced directly in working within their teams or those that you partner with from a coaching perspective, because we take a little bit from each of those great leaders and conversely from the terrible leaders, the ones that we don't want to emulate or we don't want to kind of instill those behaviors in the clients that we coach and support. So it's wonderful to hear that this leader who was so early on in your working experience shared some of the values that you've spoken so passionately about today. You're creating those spaces for growth, experimentation, directing people towards a kind of common purpose. I think that's a really nice way for us to finish on. But before we go, I'd love to ask you, what is your one pearl of wisdom for a coach who works with leaders?
Even though I'm actually quite an active, creative person and I'm very much at home doing all sorts of, interesting experimental things with leaders, I think my actual pearl of wisdom would be much quieter. So it would be never underestimate the power of being alongside someone, offering them the time and the space to think.
Julie, you've shared so many inspiring directions with the coaching you take. I love how you are experimenting and creating space. Are there any resources that our listeners could look to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Oh, thank you, Simone. Well, I've got a chapter specifically around improvisation and coaching, which is coming up in the forthcoming book called Art-Based Approaches to Coaching. And that's by Andrea Giraldes Hayes and Max Eames. So that's coming out shortly. But there's also an AC Coaching Perspectives article about some of the work that I do and the ways in which I approach leadership coaching. So that's available and can be available in the show notes. And also, this was a crazy project, but myself, together with Professor Jonathan Passmore and 3 other of my fellow students from an MSc that we did in Henley a number of years ago, we gathered together 3 volumes of coaching tools from coaches across the world from many different disciplines. So it's over 300 tools from, I think, about 100 different coaches. So if anyone just wants the kind of volumes to browse to get some ideas, then they're quite nice resources and they're beautifully illustrated. And that's called Coaching Tools.
Fantastic. And I can attest to how fantastic those tomes are because I use them myself. And we'll make sure that we capture those in the show notes so people can have a look towards the resources. And of course, they can get in touch with you to find out more.
Yes. Thank you so much, Simone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie, for your energy and your passion today, speaking with me about leadership for the Association for Coaching podcast. Where can people learn more about your work or get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you, Simone. It's just been lovely to have this conversation. My website is currently under review, so don't look there, but I can be found on LinkedIn. That's the place to find me. And some of the things I'm involved in, as I say, I teach on the Henley Professional Certificate in Coaching, and I also teach a session on improvisation and coaching on the MSc in Coaching for Behavioural Change at Henley. So there are a couple of the things that I'm involved in. And of course, I have my own private practice, which is called The Specialist Generalist. And I suppose you got probably a sense that I'm quite a generalist from the conversation that we've had.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and the wonderful experiences and indeed the incredible creativity you're bringing to the coaching world. So thanks so much, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Simone.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts like this one, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.